أيامك تمضي لكنك ذاكرة تبقى، أسرار تلتحف العمق نسألها فتثير الشوق، نبحث عن أكثرها صدقا وعسانا أن نحدث فرقا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our history on the scales. Originally, this was a history series developed and presented by Dr. Tareq Al-Suwaidan. Who was Dr. Tareq Al-Suwaidan? He's a leading Muslim scholar and thinker from the Arab world, originally from Kuwait, whose works have defined a generation of Muslim revival. His influence has been relatively unknown in the English-speaking world, partially due to a lack of translation effort towards his enormous volumes of production. With over 150 books written and dozens of series presented, it will take years of effort to begin to cover his fingerprint. Today, I want to begin a small step in that direction by translating his most beloved series to my heart, and in my opinion, his most advanced yet underrated series, Our History on the Scales. This series was meant to give an honest and personal re-evaluation of Islamic history, putting the claims of lovers and haters alike on the scales of truth, so to speak. In this series, he went into incredible levels of depth, comparing early Muslim historians with later Orientalists, modern Muslim historians, and everything in between. The goal was to give viewers a balanced view of what really happened over the course of Islam's history, trying to develop a balanced methodology. I'd like to go over how I would like to do this translation project. So, of course, I want to focus on translating the core message, including the methodology that he goes over and the examples that Dr. Sunan goes over. Of course, I'll be voicing most of it in my own voice. Although for some sections, it's going to be, especially for the high production scenes, I'm going to just have some subtitles at the bottom. I'm also going to update the examples and methodology with the new findings because this was released back in 2013, so I want it to be fully up to date. I'm also going to go into more depth on certain sections beyond the walls of the safe traditional limitations that Dr. Tara tried to kind of remain in, right? Dr. Tara comes from a very specific school and background, and very often, he tries to. Sometimes he crosses the line of his safe school, but other times he doesn't. And so I kind of want to be a bit more straightforward with that. On certain topics, let's say we have more freedom than he did back then. So we'll go over that in full detail when the time comes. Lastly, of course, I want to expand the focus to encompass all of history, right? Not just kind of Western style, or sorry, not only Islamic history, right? I want it to be Muslim history, of course, like that's the focus, but also bring in compare it with Western history and the methodology of the West takes not just to Islamic history, but actually to their own history. Why are they so different? For example, why did Muslims develop the Isnad tradition, but Westerners didn't? These are things that I think really help you appreciate the unique aspects of Islam's history when you compare it, and historiography, when you compare it to the Western tradition and really all other forms of historical preservation traditions. Sort of minor side note here. So of course I'm going to be using the footage that is currently available to me. The only one I can find is of very low quality, 240 pixels specifically, which is very low on YouTube. If anyone can find higher quality versions, I would highly appreciate it. I would love to use it in future recordings. When the show was released, it was incredibly high quality. So it's kind of a shame that I have to utilize very low quality clips in its place. So appreciate it. Also, I'm going to try to upload these on a weekly schedule. So 30 episodes is the whole thing. So you could expect 30 times 4 weeks. So that's going to take, divided by 4. With all of the extra episodes, it's probably going to be in a good 10 months to a year to cover the whole thing. But I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a very fun journey. So with that said, and without further ado, let us begin.
يحتاجك يا تاريخ لنا نبراسا والميزان هنا.
Now, first, let's talk about the extremes of historical perception. So, specifically when it comes to Islamic history, we can kind of divide it broadly into two very broad camps, right? One of them we're going to call the sanctification team, and the other one we're going to call it the denigration team, right? So, on one extreme, you have the sanctification team, right? And they believe that our history is treated as if it were a sacred Quran on earth, right? Like the same sacredness that we treat the Quran and the Hadith and every sacred text and aspects of our tradition, we also treat our history and all of our characters in history and all of our rulers and all of our commanders. Um, the Tariq makes a specific reference here, which is very common in the Islamic world. Ya wa mu'tasima wa islama, right? And I just want to kind of explain this reference because most of the English-speaking reference won't really get it. But this is during one of the very famous Abbasid Khalifas. I believe it starts with Al-Mustahkim. I believe Mustahkim bi Amrillah. I'll maybe put a little comment on that. But basically, the story goes that this Khalifa, during his period, the Romans attacked, raided one of the border towns, and one of the women who was captured shouted, Wa Mu'tasima. Oh, sorry, it's from the name, right? The Khalifa al-Mu'tasim. So she shouted basically the name of the Khalifa, and the news of this woman shouting his name reached the Khalifa, and he said, I'm going to, not let her shout be in vain. And so he sent a very angry letter, from the king of the Arabs to the dog of the Romans. Like the story used to be referenced quite a bit in Jum'ah khutbahs and in popular folk tales. And it's a true story, but it's used as an example of, back then, whenever anybody would scream for help in the Muslim world, there would be someone to save it. Now the question is, was that story true? Is it and more so than the story itself was the characterization of the story, specifically what it says about Mu'tasim. Does that accurately represent him as a ruler? Like that's where we're going to go into the weeds here. And the simple, just the simple reality, right, is that no, as Muslims, our history is not as divine as our religious texts. As it's something that Saqadi used to say quite a lot, our religion is divine, but our history is human. So yes, Muslims have made a lot of mistakes across their history, and especially Muslim rulers, Muslim commanders, and everyone in between. So we'll get into some of those examples as we go on through the series. But then on the other camp, we have the denigration team, right? History for them overflows with blood, swords, tyranny, injustice, and conspiracies. They reduce our history to two cities. One was burned by the Mongols, and the other one was occupied by the Crusaders. And that's all of our history, right? It's either we're losing, with the enemy is overwhelming us. There's just all this blood and infighting and injustice. And I think firstly, it's important to note that this is not just non-Muslims, although of course a large part, especially of the more extreme and the stupid stuff, usually does come from outside the tradition, but even from within the tradition, like there's a lot of very internally highly critical stuff that goes a little bit into extreme. And again, it's the general vibe, right? Of trying to characterize all of Muslim history in a very specific way and in a very specific light. And some of it is true. Not all, as we said already, like not all of it is negative. And at the end of the day, Baghdad was burned down by the Mongols, and Palestine was temporarily occupied by the Crusaders. as it is occupied now. But that's not a full characterization of all Islamic history. And so once you hyper focus on those times and those images, try to kind of paint it all as always being like that, then obviously you're painting a false image. So we'll talk into more detail on that as we go on, and we'll do into more examples. But before that, I want to share with you a small video about Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun is considered to be probably the most advanced Muslim historian in terms of methodology, and especially the theories that he developed from his study of history about the way things work. He's seen as sort of the father of the social sciences, economics, sociology. So I'll let the video do the talking for me, and enjoy.
كيف قرأ مؤرخون فلسفة الحضارات وحياة الشعوب؟ وكيف أثروا في تحليل التاريخ والدول والمجتمعات؟ في تونس ولد العلامة الحضرمي ابن خلدون، وفيها حفظ القرآن الكريم وتتلمذ على يد والده. درس ابن خلدون في جامعة الزيتونة في تونس وجامعة القرويين في فاس، وفي الجامع الأزهر في القاهرة، وهي الجامعات الأكثر شهرة في ذلك الوقت. كان ابن خلدون فقيها ومارس القضاء في مصر، كما كان دبلوماسيا من الطراز الأول. ساهم خلال عمله في حل نزاعات دولية آنذاك. اشتهر ابن خلدون بأنه مؤسس علم الاجتماع، وله فيه نظريات تعتبر مرجعا هاما حتى عصرنا الحالي، ضمنها في مقدمة مصنفه العبر في ديوان المبتدأ والخبر في أيام العرب والعجم والبربر ومن عاصرهم من ذوي السلطان الأكبر، وهي المقدمة المشهورة بمقدمة ابن خلدون، وفيها خلاصة آرائه في العمران والاجتماع والتاريخ والاقتصاد وأحوال المجتمع الإنساني. تعد المقدمة من أشهر ما كتب العلامة ابن خلدون. دامت كتاباتها 4 سنوات، وهي ذات صبغة موسوعية، ويلاحظ أن كل الموضوعات التي تم التعرض إليها تستجيب لنظام محكم يتمثل في مقدمة و6 أبواب توزعت على فصول عدة. كانت لابن خلدون فلسفته الخاصة، فحدد التاريخ بأنه في ظاهره لا يزيد على أخبار عن الأيام والدول، وفي باطنه نظر وتحقيق وتعليل للكائنات ومبادئها، وعلم بكيفيات الوقائع وأسبابها. اعترف الغرب بمساهمات ابن خلدون القيمة، ويعد من أكثر من ترجموا له من الشخصيات الإسلامية. يقول جورج مارسي: يعتبر مؤلف ابن خلدون واحداً من أهم وأعمق المؤلفات التي أنتجتها العبقرية الإنسانية. ويقول إيف لاكوست إن مؤلف ابن خلدون الخارج عن المألوف يعلن ولادة التاريخ كعلم قائم الذات.
Right, so I hope you enjoyed that. Now for the next section, we're going to be talking about the 5 scales of history. So Dr. Tareq divided his show to these sort of major 5 scales, and then he went into a lot more detail over each one, going through multiple episodes. So this is kind of just a bit of a sneak peek, an appetizer, if you will, of what we're going to be covering in this series. Right? So the first scale of history that we're going to examine is reality versus myth, right? What happened, what we know happened versus what we know didn't happen, right? Prioritizing authentic, established facts over fabricated legends, and identifying and exposing the massive scale of forgery and invented historical events, right? So of course here Dr. Tareq is coming from a Muslim Sunni mainstream perspective. And we view a lot of the what we call in Arabic mawdu' or inauthentic or fabricated hadiths and reports to be primarily done um, on purpose, right? And for specific political reasons, for specific religious reasons, to embolden and further attest to the veracity of certain deviant understandings of Islam. So we'll dive into that. I might add also a few more details on that since I've had my own independent research in that area. On the next topic, we also have past versus future. All right, and this is kind of more of a psychological topic that Dr. kind of actually puts a lot of attention to, which is why do we look at history, right? Are we diving into history to escape from the present, right, as a form of escapism? Or are we extracting lessons as actionable insights for a bright future? So, of course, a lot of people do use history as an escape mechanism from the reality that we are living in, right? Currently we might be going through some tough times as a Muslim ummah. We feel weak, we feel surrounded, we feel divided, and so psychologically we want to go back to those times of strengths and unity and offense rather than this passivity that we're currently living in. That can be very attractive, but it can also be very destructive, right? The really the healthy motivation behind studying and extracting history should be a very proactive, actionable um, motivation in which we are asking ourselves, what can I learn from this, right? The study, Dr. Tariq makes a very convincing and strong case that the studying of history should not and cannot be this kind of escapism. The same way somebody might read a novel or watch a movie just to pass the time or to kill the time. It needs to come from a place of genuinely searching for solutions to the current problems that we have, understanding our present, right? And he makes the famous quote of the poem attributed to Imam Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. ليس الفتى من قال كان أبي إن الفتى من قال ها أنا ذا. The true youth or the true man is not the one who says my father was, it's the one who says here I am. So, you know, we shouldn't be chained to our history. The history isn't the only thing that defines us. It's one of the many things that shape us. We use it to understand our present and also to predict and move towards the future. The next scale is origins versus derivatives, right? We're talking about primary sources versus secondary sources, right? So, alhamdulillah, in Islam, we have a wealth of primary sources that go very, very back and very close to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But those primary sources also have their own limitations, their challenges to work with. How much should we work with them? Should the average person work with them? How much? So we're going to talk a bit about that. And I'm also going to compare it to modern works, the accessibility that they have, but also the issues that they often fall into, right? Being affected by modernity and the modern isms and the back projection that happens very often from different terms, and the retrojection and trying to back project back all the different isms and all the different psychological challenges that we have in the modern day. That's something you don't have to deal with when dealing with primary sources to an extent. So it's going to be interesting to look to, again, have a balanced approach to these two, academic approach, consistent approach, and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of both. The fourth scale is emotion versus reason, right? Within Islam, of course, we have weak narrations, which is a massive can of worms. Weak narrations, or in Arabic, da'if. Even I hate this translation, but whatever. Definitely will have a lot to say there. Probably will have like my own separate episode on the topic of dealing with weak narrations. But there's one particular historical, I don't even want to say methodology, let's say tendency that many people tend to fall into, which is, oh, I'm going to use weak narrations when they benefit me, but I'm going to ignore their weaknesses when they benefit me, but I'm going to point them out when they don't benefit, my narrative. This is obviously a very inconsistent approach, but many Muslim scholars have fallen into, and Muslim schools of knowledge have fallen into. So this is quite problematic, but we're going to talk about it in a lot of detail because there's a lot of detail here between, what is sahih and weak and what is acceptable to narrate in history versus in seerah versus in fiqh. So again, very, very long topic, but it needs to be kind of addressed and talked about. And the aim is obviously to ultimately reach a very consistent approach to these things. Lastly, we have idealism versus realism, right? Of course, we kind of already addressed this in the introduction section, but we want to distinguish, of course, between the infallibility of Islam and the fallibility of Muslims. And specifically, of course, as Sunni Muslims, especially, we want to reject the cult of infallibility around certain historical figures and accept the fact that humans make mistakes. It's one of our defining characteristics as humans. And yes, that does include prophets. The Dr. Tariq makes specific example, of the prophets and how they're described and characterized in the Quran. As Muslims, if we see the Quran as the truest book, it's also a book of many things, but it's also in a way a book of history. And the characterization of the prophets in the Quran is very unapologetic. It's one that doesn't hide their mistakes, whether it's Adam eating the apple or Moses accidentally, killing someone, or Yunus abandoning his people, like the prophet who said, حتى يقول الرسول والذين معه متى نصر الله. Right? When is so that the prophet who was challenged, and the earth was shaking behind him so strongly that he started to question when will the victory of Allah come. This is a very human approach. It's one that doesn't shy away from the doubt and the challenges that the prophets face. And so the later, if this is the prophets, what do you think about those who came after them, and the companions and the tabi'in? Of course, they were more human than the prophets. And so our history needs to reflect that and not paint a magical alternative or a perfect alternative that just isn't real. Yeah. So lastly, Dr. Tariq always has a powerful end quote. So I'll share the one of today, which is, history is a discipline that aims to explain not just how things happened, but why. And what are the cycles we can begin to see? It helps us understand the present, but its most important use is for planning and forecasting the future. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you very much for listening for me all the way up until this point. Highly appreciate it. Leave any questions in the comments down below. Highly appreciate if you can subscribe, like the video, do all the social stuff, share it with your friends, anyone who can benefit from. And I'll see you in our next episodes, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.